They say death is the great silence, but in Ireland 1947, that silence never came. When one twin vanished into the grave, the other kept speaking to her and claimed the replies never stopped. Eyewitness accounts, parish records, and family testimonies suggest this isn't folklore. It really happened. October 3rd, 1947, Ireland. The parish records list it simply. Funeral of Bridget O'Donnell, aged 9 years, pneumonia. Nothing in the handwriting betrays the extraordinary events that would follow. At the time, people believed the O'Donnell twins were just another story of heartbreak in a year when illness swept through villages and ration lines still shaped everyday life. Bridget and Eileen were inseparable. Identical in face, though different in temperament. Bridget was the quieter, Eileen the louder. They shared a single bed in their family's farmhouse, whispered secrets under the quilt, and often finished each other's sentences. Neighbors in the parish said they had the twin look, that strange, almost unspoken bond. When pneumonia struck Bridget in late September, the family thought it was just another autumn fever. But by October 1st, the child's breathing grew ragged, her lips turned blue, and despite the local doctor's efforts, camphor rub, boiled water, even prayers, she slipped away in the night. Her twin sister Eileen was present in the room when it happened. Family testimonies say she did not cry the way children normally do. Instead, she simply whispered, "I'll see you tomorrow, Bridget," as if nothing had ended. The O'Donnell home filled with neighbors, relatives, and parishioners for the wake. A Bible was laid open on the kitchen table, candles flickered, and rosary beads clicked in nervous fingers. Eileen sat in the corner, clutching Bridget's favorite doll, refusing to leave her sister's coffin. One visitor, Margaret Flaherty, later told an interviewer in the 1970s, the strangest thing was not the grief but the calm on the child's face. She leaned close to that coffin, and I swore I heard her whisper, then pause as though listening for the reply. No one wanted to believe it then. They chalked it up to shock. Children, after all, sometimes imagine things to cope, but the details grew harder to dismiss. At one point during the wake, Eileen looked directly at her mother and said, in a voice too steady for a grieving 9-year-old, "Bridget says she isn't cold. She says she wants her blanket." Her mother went pale. The blanket was in the bedroom upstairs, Bridget's favorite, embroidered with tiny blue flowers. No one had mentioned it aloud. On October 3rd, the villagers followed the horse-drawn cart to the parish churchyard. The coffin was lowered, the soil was shoveled, and the final prayers were spoken. As the crowd began to disperse, Eileen tugged at her father's coat and whispered something that froze him. "Don't walk too fast." Bridget says she can't keep up. Witnesses claimed the father stumbled, almost fell, before hurrying the child along. He later told relatives he had heard his daughter's voice tremble, not from fear, but as though she were straining to listen to someone standing right beside her. That night in the farmhouse, the O'Donnell family tried to return to routine. The fire crackled, the wind pressed against the windows, and silence filled the girls' shared bedroom, now occupied by only one. Eileen refused to let her mother tuck her in. Instead, she turned her face toward the empty side of the bed and murmured, "Good night, Bridget," according to her older brother Patrick. What happened next unsettled him so deeply that he recorded it decades later in a sworn statement. "I was in the hall outside. I heard her say goodnight. And then, I'll never forget this, I heard 2 voices laugh. Hers and another, like a whisper carried on the air. But the other voice was not in the room with me. It was deeper, echoing somehow. Patrick didn't sleep that night. Neither did his parents." Over the following days, small disturbances took root in the O'Donnell home. A crucifix hanging in the hallway was found tilted each morning. The Bible on the kitchen table kept falling open to the book of Job, though no one admitted moving it. Eileen's school notebook began to fill with words she claimed Bridget was telling her. Whole sentences, though her handwriting slipped between her own and another style, more cramped, less childlike. Neighbors began whispering that the twins had been touched. Parishioners murmured about liminality, the thin veil between the living and the dead. One evening, as her father returned from the fields, he heard Eileen's laughter spilling out of the empty bedroom. When he opened the door, he found her sitting cross-legged on the bed, nodding to the vacant pillow beside her. "What are you doing?" he asked. She looked up at him, serious as stone. "Bridget was just telling me you're tired. She said you should sit." And then, before his eyes, the indentation on the pillow sank, as if pressed by a child's unseen head. In a 1982 interview preserved in the National Folklore Collection, a neighbor recalled, "I don't care what people say now. I was in that house. I saw the bed move. I heard the whisper. The girl wasn't playing games. Something was there, answering her." October 12, 1947. On the evening of October 12th, 9 days after the funeral, the family sat around the table. The air was cold, the oil lamp flickered, and supper sat mostly untouched. Eileen suddenly stood, turned toward the hallway, and said with startling clarity, "Bridget says someone is at the door." The family fell silent. Moments later, a heavy knock echoed through the farmhouse. When her father opened the door, there was no one outside. Only the chill night air and the sound, faint but undeniable, of two children laughing in the dark. October 18, 1947. Parish. The O'Donnell family was no stranger to hardship, but what unfolded after Bridget's burial was unlike anything the parish had seen. Father Callahan, the local priest, recorded in his notes, "The surviving child insists she still speaks with her dead sister. Her words are consistent. Family claim they hear replies. The matter may require intervention." The entry is brief, but it marks the moment the church itself began acknowledging what was happening in the farmhouse. By mid-October, Eileen no longer whispered only at night. She spoke aloud in daylight, as though Bridget were seated beside her. The family's kitchen became the center of these conversations. Her mother recalled one morning when Eileen sipped warm milk from a chipped diner mug and suddenly pushed it toward the empty chair. "Bridget wants a drink too." When her brother Patrick scoffed, "She's gone, Eileen." The mug slid half an inch across the wooden table. Everyone froze. Patrick dropped his Lucky Strike cigarette into the ashtray, his hands trembling. He later admitted he couldn't explain what he saw, but he knew no breeze had moved it. The strangeness spread beyond the kitchen. Items disappeared, only to reappear where no one had left them. The family's flashlight, last seen in the coat closet, turned up under Bridget's old pillow. A page from the family Bible containing Psalm 23 tore itself free and was found folded inside Eileen's schoolbook. An old Polaroid photo of the twins, taken at a summer fair, shifted from the mantel to the floor, face down, the edges scorched as if touched by flame. Each incident frayed nerves further. The O'Donnells began locking doors, latching the chain at night, and saying rosaries before bed. But the voices never ceased. Neighbors reported odd happenings when they visited. Margaret Flaherty, who had first noticed Eileen whispering at the wake, returned one evening to drop off bread. She swore she heard laughter echoing from the basement laundry, yet the door was locked, and no one was inside. Later, Patrick's schoolmate Michael Murphy recalled walking past the farmhouse on the suburban road leading into town. "I heard girls talking, two of them, plain as day. But when I glanced through the window, I only saw Eileen sitting there, nodding. She looked right at me, like she knew I could hear the other voice too." The most disturbing episode of October came through an old typewriter the family kept in the parlor. It had belonged to their uncle, left unused for years. One night, as the family sat in uneasy silence, the machine began to clatter. Patrick ran to it, thinking perhaps a key had slipped loose. Instead, the typewriter slowly spelled out a single line, "I am not gone." Eileen, who had been drowsing by the fire, lifted her head and said quietly, "Bridget told me she was tired of whispering." Her father yanked the paper free, stuffed it into the coat closet, and locked the door. But by morning, the sheet had vanished, later found tucked into the hymnal at the parish church. No one admitted moving it. By late October, the farmhouse felt less like a home and more like a stage for something unseen. The family barely slept. They jumped at footsteps in the hall, though no one was there. The door chain rattled at odd hours, as if tugged by invisible hands. One evening, their mother attempted to distract Eileen by sending her to a nearby boarding house to stay with cousins for the night. Perhaps a change of scenery would help. But when the cousins awoke, they found Eileen standing at the fire escape, staring into the darkness. "She says Bridget wants to come in through the window," the girl whispered. Decades later, one cousin described that night in a taped interview. "We locked every door. We shut the fire escape window tight. But when we came back into the room, the chain was swinging, like someone had just forced their way through. And Eileen kept smiling, as if she weren't alone." October 31st, 1947. On Halloween night, the family gathered with neighbors at the parish hall for safety. The children bobbed for apples, the adults drank weak tea, and for a few hours it almost felt normal. But just before midnight, the parish payphone rang. The operator insisted the call had come from the O'Donnell farmhouse, miles away, locked and empty. Father Callahan answered, holding the receiver to his ear. His face went pale. The line carried two voices, young and overlapping. One was clearly Eileen. The other matched Bridget's parish. Recordings from school. Both were singing the same lullaby their mother had taught them, though one of those girls was supposed to be buried beneath the churchyard. Earth, November 2nd, 1947, parish records. 2 days after the Halloween phone call, Father Callahan wrote in his log, "Voices continue. Parishioners alarmed. Family distressed. Child insists sister walks with her. Recommends search of home." The decision to search the farmhouse was not one the priest made lightly, but the reports were growing too consistent. Voices, objects moving, even visitors hearing laughter. To calm the village, the O'Donnell home would be inspected. That Sunday afternoon, the family gathered in the kitchen as Father Callahan, Patrick, and two neighbors walked the creaking floors with oil lamps and a flashlight. They checked the coat closet, the cellar, even the small attic where potatoes were stored. But nothing seemed out of place until Patrick paused near the back wall of the basement laundry. A draft slipped through the stone. When the men pressed on it, the wall shifted slightly, revealing the edge of a hidden door. Behind the wall was a narrow chamber, barely wider than a coffin, with stone walls blackened by damp. Dust coated the floor, and in one corner sat a rusted typewriter, its ribbon dried but its keys marked with fingerprints in the dust. More disturbing was what hung on the opposite wall, a string of Polaroid photographs pinned in a row. Each photo showed the twins together, but in every image, Bridget's face was blurred, her eyes pale, as though light had burned her out. Pinned beneath the photos were scraps of paper, sentences typed in uneven letters. "I will not go. She listens to me. We share one breath." The discovery horrified the O'Donnells. Eileen, brought down into the hidden room, smiled calmly and said, "This is where she waits when you make her leave me." Her father pulled her away, but the girl screamed until her voice cracked. "You can't shut her in. She'll be angry." The neighbors swore later that the rusted typewriter clicked on its own, typing a single word before their eyes. Yes. That night, the priest carried some of the papers back to the parish church. He locked them inside the hymnal cabinet, hoping to study them later. But when he opened the cabinet the next morning, the papers were gone. In their place was a cassette tape, though no one in the parish owned a recorder. When played on borrowed equipment, the tape carried faint static and then the sound of two children giggling, followed by the voice of Eileen saying, "She's standing right behind you." The recording ended abruptly. By mid-November, word had spread through the village. People avoided walking past the farmhouse at night. Mothers whispered warnings to their children. Some said the O'Donnells were cursed. Others believed the twins had been born under an unlucky sign. A rumor circulated that the farmhouse stood on old famine ground, land where dozens of unmarked graves still lay. Though no records confirmed this, the idea clung to the case like smoke. One evening, as Patrick lit a cigarette on the porch, he confronted his sister. "You've got to stop this, Eileen. You're scaring everyone." She stared at him, her eyes too old for 9. "I'm not scaring them. Bridget is. And she says she doesn't like you smoking." Patrick laughed nervously, blowing smoke into the air. "She's dead, Eileen, dead." The girl tilted her head, listening to the empty air. Then she whispered, "She says she can prove she's not." That night, the farmhouse shook with a violent pounding. The door chain rattled until it snapped. The family rushed into the hall, the flashlight beam cutting through shadows. On the floor lay another Polaroid photo, fresh, unstained by age. It showed the family as they stood that very moment in the hall. Patrick holding the flashlight, their mother clutching Eileen, and standing beside them. Unmistakable, though buried weeks ago, was Bridget. Her face was not blurred this time. Her mouth was open, caught mid-scream. By the time the parish bells rang out the last weeks of 1947, the Doyle farmhouse had become a place people crossed themselves when passing. Fear had spread through Ballyglass like frost over a window pane. Everyone knew what the surviving twin, Eileen, claimed, that her dead sister still spoke to her, still walked the house with bare feet that left no mark. But the true terror wasn't in what Eileen said. It was in what others began to see and hear for themselves. On Christmas Eve, the Doyle family held a modest supper. A single candle burned in the window, the old Irish tradition of guiding lost souls home. Eileen sat quietly at the table, her spoon untouched, her gaze fixed on the empty chair beside her. Her mother gently urged her to eat. Instead, Eileen whispered, "She's already had her fill." The words unsettled her father, who demanded to know whom she was speaking about. But before Eileen could answer, the cutlery on the table rattled as though disturbed by a sudden quake. The candle flame twisted violently sideways, though no draft blew through the closed room. The family froze in silence. That night, a neighbor, Patrick O'Leary, was returning from midnight mass. He swore under oath years later that as he passed the Doyle home, he saw two silhouettes in the upstairs window. Two children standing shoulder to shoulder, their hands pressed to the glass. Yet everyone in Ballyglass knew one of those children had been buried weeks before. The parish priest, Father Byrne, could no longer ignore the growing hysteria. He agreed to visit the Doyle home and speak privately with Eileen. The child confessed that her twin, Bridget, never left her side. "She tells me things," Eileen whispered. "Things I couldn't know unless she was here." When pressed for an example, Eileen described the priest's own chambers at the rectory, the cracked crucifix above his bed, the drawer where he kept his private diary. Father Byrne staggered back, pale as milk. No one outside his walls could have known such details. Word spread like wildfire. Some believed Eileen was possessed. Others believed she was truly haunted by her sister. The whispers around town grew so loud that Father Byrne organized a prayer gathering in the Doyle home. Half the village crammed into the farmhouse that night, rosaries clutched in their trembling hands. At first the prayers seemed to bring calm. The house held its breath, the air thick but still. Then, without warning, the sound of a child's laugh echoed through the rafters. High-pitched, unmistakably girlish, but not from Eileen's lips. Her mouth remained shut, her face pale as if she'd heard it too. Women screamed, men made the sign of the cross. The gathering ended in chaos. Some swore they saw the second twin dart across the hallway upstairs. Others claimed to feel a small hand tugging at their coats as they rushed out the door. By morning, the Doyle family stood alone, isolated, marked as cursed. Eileen's mother wanted to take her daughter far away, to relatives in Cork, but her father refused. "If one daughter lies in this ground," he said grimly, "then the other stays with her. We won't tempt fate by leaving." His words carried a weight that chilled even him, and so the family stayed. And Eileen, still just a child, grew thinner, paler, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. She spoke less and less to the living, more and more to the empty air. Sometimes in the dead of night her parents would wake to hear two voices rising softly in conversation, two identical voices, as if the twins had never been parted by death at all. What no one could explain, and what drove even the priest into despair, was the writing that began to appear. On the walls of Eileen's bedroom, on the fogged glass of the windows, were phrases no child her age could have scrawled. "Don't leave me. We're still together." And once, more chilling than all the rest, "She belongs to me now." By the dawn of the new year, the Doyle family realized their haunting was no longer a private grief. It was a presence that demanded to be acknowledged, by the living, by the church, by everyone who dared to look too closely. But the most terrifying proof was still to come, and it would shatter what little hope they clung to. By the week before Christmas, the O'Donnell farmhouse had become nearly unlivable. Doors slammed at random, the radio tuned itself to static, and neighbors refused to enter. Patrick had taken to sleeping with a lantern burning, while his mother prayed over Eileen's bed each night until her voice went hoarse. Eileen, meanwhile, seemed both weaker and stranger. Her eyes sunk into shadows, and she rarely ate. Yet at night, her voice could be heard clearly through the walls, speaking in whispers, then laughter, then long pauses as though she listened. One evening, Patrick swore he heard a second set of footsteps in the hall, bare feet, padding slowly just behind his sister's. But when he spun with the lantern, the hallway was empty. The priest, pale and haggard himself, returned to the house on December 22nd with a heavy book and a vial of holy water. "I'll not lie to you," he admitted to Mrs. O'Donnell. "This isn't ordinary grief. Something has anchored here." The plan was simple: bless each room, read scripture, and forbid Eileen from answering any voice that wasn't her own. But as the prayers began, the farmhouse rebelled. Windows rattled. The old clock in the parlor struck 13 times. In the kitchen, the rusted typewriter, moved days earlier into storage, began hammering furiously without a ribbon. The letters imprinted nothing, but the sound echoed like gunfire. The child clutched the crucifix given to her, then suddenly threw it across the room. "She says you're liars," Eileen shrieked, her small frame shaking with fury. "She says you buried her too soon." The priest attempted to hold her, but she convulsed violently, eyes rolling back. And then, in a voice deeper than her own, she said, "You'll never separate us." Her mother fainted. Patrick dragged her away, but the air in the farmhouse thickened with the stench of damp earth, like a grave freshly opened. On Christmas Eve, the family awoke to find new Polaroid photographs scattered across the hallway floor. None of them owned a camera. The images showed scenes from inside the house: Eileen at the table, Patrick smoking on the porch, their mother weeping at the bedside. But in every photo, Bridget was present, her form clearer and clearer, as if returning to flesh. The final photograph was the most disturbing. The family gathered at the Christmas table, heads bowed in prayer, though no such gathering had taken place yet. Bridget sat among them, eyes fixed directly on the lens. Patrick tore the photographs to pieces and threw them into the stove. "Enough! We're not playing her games!" But Eileen only smiled faintly, her lips cracking with dryness. "She says you can burn paper, but not her. She says you'll see for yourself tomorrow." That night, as snow fell over the village, the farmhouse shook again. Neighbors later testified they saw lights moving from room to room, though every window was boarded. Inside, Patrick and his mother huddled in the kitchen as Eileen wandered the hall, singing a Christmas hymn in a voice that shifted between hers and Bridget's. At exactly midnight, the old typewriter banged one final time and fell silent. When Patrick found the page the next morning, only one line had been struck across it: "Tomorrow will be one." The family, terrified and sleepless, prepared to flee the farmhouse the next day. But before dawn, a knock rattled the front door, 3 sharp knocks as if from small hands. When Patrick opened it, snow blew in. No footprints marked the ground. Only a single Polaroid lay on the doorstep, face down in the snow. He turned it over with trembling fingers. The image showed 2 small beds in the farmhouse bedroom, both occupied, and both girls smiling. December 26, 1947. The farmhouse felt colder than the snow outside. Patrick hadn't slept. Neither had his mother. The Polaroid on the doorstep burned in his pocket. Its smiling twin faces seared into his mind. Eileen had vanished from her bed before dawn. Her nightgown left a faint trail of wet footprints leading toward the attic, the one room the priest had warned them never to open. Patrick grabbed the lantern and followed. His mother begged him not to, clutching her rosary until her fingers bled, but he climbed anyway. The attic door, swollen with age, creaked open. Inside, the air was dense and damp, as though a grave had been opened overhead. Dust swirled like smoke, yet the room smelled not of cedar or old wood, but of earth and rot. Eileen stood in the center, facing the far wall. "Bridget says it's time," she whispered. "She's been waiting." Patrick's lantern flickered, and in that dim light he saw something impossible. 2 shadows cast on the attic wall. One was Eileen's small frame. The other stood beside her, slender, the same height, holding her hand. "Eileen, come to me," Patrick pleaded. There's no one there, but the second shadow moved, independent of the lantern. Slowly, it turned its head, and he swore he saw eyes glimmering where none should be. Downstairs, the bells of St. Bridget's Church began to toll for morning mass. At each strike, Eileen stiffened, then cried out, "She says the bells hurt her," she screamed. "Stop them!" Patrick lunged forward, pulling Eileen into his arms. For one moment he felt her warmth, her heartbeat. But as he held her, another icy hand seemed to press against his chest, trying to push him away. He dragged her down from the attic, fighting the weight of something unseen, until they collapsed at their mother's feet. For hours, Eileen drifted in and out of delirium. She spoke sometimes as herself, sometimes as Bridget. At one point, both voices came at once, layered, echoing through the small farmhouse like overlapping radio signals. Finally, in a rare moment of clarity, she turned to her brother and whispered, "Patrick, I can't hold her anymore." Her body went still. By dawn the next day, December 27th, Eileen was gone. No illness could be found, no mark upon her body. The doctor's report listed sudden heart failure, but Patrick never believed it. The family buried her beside Bridget, twin graves side by side, each marked with a small wooden cross. At the funeral, villagers swore they heard two girls laughing faintly in the distance, though no children were near. The O'Donnell farmhouse was abandoned within the year. Roof beams collapsed, fields grew wild, and eventually the land was sold off. But in the village of Kilkenny, the story endures. To this day, locals whisper that if you stand near the graves at dusk, you may hear two voices, soft, girlish, and inseparable. Some say it was grief, others possession. But one detail remains in every account. The twins were never apart for long. In Ireland, 1947, death claimed one twin, but the haunting proved something more terrible, that love, in its darkest form, can outlast the grave. The end.